Hello, my name's Emmanuel Richards. This is part 3 of my little story narrative that I'm putting together. Now, today's topic is, I guess it's about anger. The world's facing a number of things at the moment, and this topic feels like the right one to talk about now. Just to give some pre-thoughts to the stories that'll be shared. If you were to ask me 25 years ago if I thought the answers to most problems were surrounded in anger, frustration, violence, the answer I would have given you was probably yes. Now, as time's gone on and I've grown, I've come to know more fully my Savior Jesus Christ, and I've come to know him through reading the scriptures. And over the years, as I've read the scriptures and come to know him, I've started to desire to be more like him. And my characteristics have changed, where there's a lot more tolerance, there's a lot more patience, there's a lot more pondering and being aware of others and how they feel before my emotions fly. So, the few videos that I'll share with you today have been significant enough in my life as lessons that have taught me how to put, I guess, the natural man, anger, frustration in perspective, and joy. Like I said, I'm not necessarily going to share what about these little stories have helped me, but rather, like a parable of old, let you watch it and take from it whatever you feel. Enjoy.
A proverb in the Old Testament states, "He that is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he that ruleth his spirit than he that taketh a city." It is when we become angry that we get into trouble. The road rage that affects our highways is a hateful expression of anger. I dare say that most of the inmates of our prisons are there because they did something when they were angry. In their wrath they swore, they lost control of themselves, and terrible things followed, even murder. There were moments of offense, followed by years of regret.
I thought of the words of the psalmist, "Cease from anger and forsake wrath." Many years ago, a young couple called my office and asked if they could come in for counseling. They indicated they had suffered a tragedy in their lives and that their marriage was in serious jeopardy. An appointment was arranged. The tension between the husband and the wife was apparent as they entered my office. Their story unfolded slowly at first, as the husband spoke haltingly and the wife cried quietly and participated very little in the conversation. The young man had returned from serving a mission and was accepted to a prestigious university in the eastern part of the United States. It was there, in a university ward, that he met his future wife. She was also a student at the university. After a year of dating, they journeyed to Utah and were married in the Salt Lake Temple, returning east shortly afterward to finish their schooling. By the time they graduated and returned to their home state, they were expecting their first child, and the husband had employment in his chosen field. The wife gave birth to a baby boy. Life was good. When their son was about 18 months old, they decided to take a short vacation to visit family members who lived a few hundred miles away. This was at a time when car seats for children and seat belts for adults were scarcely heard of, let alone used. The 3 members of the family all rode in the front seat, with the toddler in the middle. Sometime during the trip, the husband and wife had a disagreement. After all these years, I cannot recall what caused it, But I do remember that their argument escalated and became so heated that they were eventually yelling at one another. Understandably, this caused their young son to begin crying, which the husband said only added to his anger. Losing total control of his temper, he picked up a toy the child had dropped on the seat and flung it in the direction of his wife. He missed hitting his wife. Instead, the toy struck their son, with the result that he was brain damaged and would be handicapped for the rest of his life. This was one of the most tragic situations I had ever encountered. I counseled and encouraged them. We talked of commitment and responsibility, of acceptance and forgiveness. We spoke of the affection and respect which needed to return to their family. We read words of comfort from the scriptures. We prayed together. Though I have not heard from them since that day so long ago, they were smiling through their tears as they left my office. All these years, I've hoped they made the decision to remain together, comforted and blessed by the gospel of Jesus Christ. I think of them whenever I read the words, "Anger doesn't solve anything. It builds nothing, but it can destroy everything." President Heber J. Grant, 7th president of the church, told of a time as a young adult when he did some work for a man who then sent him a check for $500 with a letter apologizing for not being able to pay him more. Then President Grant did some work for another man, work which was, he said, 10 times more difficult, involving 10 times more labor and a great deal more time. This second man sent him a check for $150. Young Heber felt he had been treated most unfairly. He was at first insulted and then incensed. He recounted the experience to an older friend who asked, "Did that man intend to insult you?" President Grant replied, "No. He told my friends he had rewarded me handsomely." To this, the older friend replied, "A man is a fool who takes an insult that isn't intended." Close quote.
A small publication that came to me some years ago carried the following, quote, "Once a man who had been slandered by a newspaper came to Edward Everett Hale asking what to do about it. Said Hale, 'Do nothing. Half the people who bought the paper never saw the article. Half of those who saw it did not read it. Half of those who read it did not understand it. Half of those who understood it did not believe it. Half of those who believed it are of no account anyway.'" So many of us make a great fuss of matters of small consequence. We are so easily offended. Happy is the man who can brush aside the offending remarks of another and go on his way.
To be angry is to yield to the influence of Satan. No one can make us angry. It is our choice. If we desire to have a proper spirit with us at all times, we must choose to refrain from becoming angry.
Grant Morrell Bowen was a hard-working, devoted husband and father who, like many, made their living on the land and had an economic downturn when the local potato crop was poor. He and his wife, Norma, took other employment, eventually moved to another city, and started their climb back to economic stability. However, in a terribly unfortunate incident, Brother Bowen was deeply hurt when in a Temple Recommend interview, The bishop was a little skeptical regarding Morell's declaration that he was a full tithe payer. I do not know which of these men had the more accurate facts that day, but I do know Sister Bowen walked out of that interview with her temple recommend renewed, while Brother Bowen walked out with an anger that would take him away from the church for 15 years. Regardless of who was right about the tithing, evidently both Morell and the bishop forgot the Savior's injunction to agree with thine adversary quickly, and Paul's counsel to let not the sun go down upon your wrath. The fact is, they didn't agree, and the sun did go down on Brother Bowen's wrath for days, and then for weeks, and then for years, proving the point made by one of the wisest of the old Romans, who said, anger, if not restrained, is frequently more destructive than the injury that provoked it. But the miracle of reconciliation is always available to us, and out of love for his family and the church he knew to be true, Morell Bowen came back into full church activity. Let me tell you briefly how that happened. Brother Bowen's son, Brad, is a good friend of ours and a devoted Area 70 serving in southern Idaho. Brad was 11 years old at the time of this incident, and for 15 years he watched his father's religious devotion decline, a witness to the terrible harvest being reaped where anger and misunderstanding had been sown. Something needed to be done. So, as the Thanksgiving holiday approached in 1977, Brad, a 26-year-old student at Brigham Young University, his wife Valerie, and new baby son Mick loaded into their student version of an automobile and, bad weather notwithstanding, drove to Billings, Montana. Not even a crash into a snowbank near West Yellowstone could keep this threesome from making their ministering contact with Brother Bowen Sr. Upon arrival, Brad and his sister Pam asked for a private moment with their father. "You've been a wonderful dad," Brad began with some emotion, "and we've always known how much you loved us. But something is wrong, and it has been for a long time. Because you were hurt once, this whole family has been hurting for years. We're broken, and you're the only one who can fix us. Please, please, after all this time, can you find it in your heart to lay aside that unfortunate incident with that bishop and again lead this family in the gospel as you once did?" There was dead silence. And then Brother Bowen looked up at these two, his children, bone of his bone and flesh of his flesh, and said very quietly, "Yes, yes, I will." Thrilled but stunned by the unexpected answer, Brad Bowen and his family watched their husband and father go to his current bishop in a spirit of reconciliation to set things right in his life. In a perfect response to this courageous but totally unexpected visit, the bishop, who had extended repeated invitations to Brother Bowen to come back, threw his arms around Morell and just held him in a long, long, long embrace. In a matter of only a few weeks, doesn't take long, Brother Bowen was fully engaged in church activity and had made himself worthy to return to the temple. Soon enough, he accepted the call to preside over a struggling little branch of 25 and grew it into a thriving congregation of well over 100. All of this took place nearly half a century ago, but the consequence of a son and a daughter's ministering plea to their own father, and that father's willingness to forgive and move forward in spite of the imperfections of others, has brought blessings that are still coming and will come forever to the Bowen family. So as Phillips Brooks wrote, you who are letting miserable little misunderstandings run on from year to year to year, meaning to clear them up someday, you who are keeping wretched quarrels alive because you cannot quite make up your mind that now is the day to sacrifice your pride and settle them. You who are passing men sullenly upon the street, not speaking to them out of some silly spite. You who are letting someone's heart ache for a word of appreciation or sympathy, which you mean to give someday, you go instantly and do the thing which you might never have another chance to do.